Hey guys, Bridget here. In this video, we're going to explore the basics of Adobe Photoshop. So by the end of this video, you're going to learn how to use Photoshop in order to edit images for your graphic design, web design, or UI UX design projects. And I myself have been a designer for the past 10 years. So I'm going to give you the basic introductions, and in future videos, we're going to go in more details and explore the more advanced concepts. So stay tuned on those. But now without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So the very first thing that you have to do in order to install Photoshop is to go on the official Adobe's website and click on Start Free Trial. Now, as you do that, you're going to be prompted with a few questions. If this is for individuals, students, teachers, or teams, just select for individuals and click on Continue. And right after that, you're going to essentially have to decide if you want to go with just Photoshop alone after the free trial is expired, or with the Creative Cloud. So if you click on Continue, you're essentially going to be prompted with some more information, and you have to make your decision from there. Now let's jump into Photoshop. So as you open Photoshop for the first time, you're going to see this screen right here, which essentially you can see on the left, your home and also your related work. You can also see some suggestions right here and some of the recent projects that you worked on. Now, in order to open an image inside of Photoshop, simply click on Open, and I'm going to select this image of this girl and click on Open. And as you can see, now it's uploading, and now we are inside the actual software. Now, alternatively, if you wanted to open an image, you can simply right-click on the image itself and select Open With and select Photoshop. Now, if you don't see it, simply click on Other, and you're going to be able to see the full list of softwares that you use. You can even search Photoshop, and then once you actually found the software, you can simply click on Open, and you're going to have the image inside of the software. Now let's get started with the basics, because Photoshop has a lot of functions, but what we want to focus on in this beginner's tutorial is essentially these tools right here, and also the right column. So the main tools of Photoshop are going to be found on this very left side, while here you're going to be able to tweak and adjust things such as the properties, layers, and much more. So the very first tool that we can see here is the Move tool. So if we actually convert this to a normal layer, we can see how we can use the Move tool in order to move the image around. Now, if we create other layers, you can see how we are going to discover one very important element in Photoshop, which is the layer systems. So everything in Photoshop works around this concept, and essentially this is going to be an essential part, because each and every layer can be adjusted individually. So I can tweak and move one layer without affecting the one below. This is something that we're going to explore in more detail in future videos as well. Now let's go ahead and let's use the very next tool, which is the rectangular selection, or actually there's quite a few of different selections, and as you can see, each and every one of these tools have these small arrows, and this indicates that there's more nested in the inner menu. So you can see how we can create selections, for example, of just this area. And if you use Command plus J or Control plus J if you're on Windows, we just created a duplicate of the selection from the layer beneath. So as you can see, now I can easily move this selection around, and I just created a new layer from there. Now, as we move on to the very next tool, we can find the polygonal and lasso tools. So the lasso tool, the very first one, is essentially going to enable you to create a selection based on what you're literally drawing on the screen. So this is very useful, especially if you have a tablet device. And you can use also the polygonal lasso tool, which is really useful if you need to select elements in a photo which are more rigid in basically. And also the magnetic lasso tool. This is another really cool feature which essentially tries to imagine and understand where are the basically the boundaries, the borders of a specific section in the image, and then it creates its own best guess. Now let's move on to the very next selection tool, and as you can see there's many selection tools, and we're really focusing on these because these are such an essential part of editing images in Photoshop that are really useful. So let's use the Magic Wand tool, which is one of the most famous tools in Photoshop. And as you can see, I can literally select a portion of the image which Photoshop thinks it's all related to one another. Now I can also use the Shift key in order to see how I can add more to this selection. And I know that this is working because the cursor, the Magic Wand tool, is actually has that plus. If you don't use the Shift, you won't be able to see that plus. But in this case, you do. And if you use the Option key, you can actually deselect some of the portions of this selection. So really useful. And now let's move on to the very next part, which is the framing tool. So, or actually the crop tool as they call it over here. So over here you can see how I can now basically frame and change the and literally crop the image. Now one thing to be noted is that once you crop the image, Photoshop is not going to save the previous version of the image, so you can see how we're missing this part over here. So in that case, simply use Command+C a few times and you're gonna be good. But if you're doing this at the early stage of a process of a project, just keep that in mind because it's quite important. Now let's move on and let's use this new tool, which is the frame tool. And this essentially enables you to create a placeholder frame in which you can also add images, for example. So you can see how I literally dragged and dropped it right here. And now I have this image. So it feels almost like Adobe InDesign, or actually Adobe XD and similar softwares. So that's that. Now let's move on to another really important one, which is the Eyedropper tool. Now, granted, you can use the Eyedropper tool also if you actually select this color right here. And then over here, you can basically see how you're going to have access to the color picker, and the cursor is just going to be the Eyedropper tool by default. So things to keep in mind. And essentially here, you're going to have the color which is selected at the moment. So if I go ahead and use the brush, for example, you can see how this color is the one that I selected. I can also use the X key in order to switch between one color and the other. And yeah, the way you change it is simply going over here, and then you can literally change it and use it. This color palette essentially. Now let's move on to the very next one, which is the patch tool. Now this is useful if you want, for example, to remove elements like this one, and you can go over here and just select a similar sample based on the surrounding. Now if you do something like that, it's going to take the sample from the incorrect part of the image. But this is really useful for doing basic retouching, and this can be useful for all sorts of different photos and basically editing scenarios. Now, as we already explored, we have the brush tool, we also have the pencil tool, color replacement tool, and mixer brush tool. We won't go into much of the details since most of the times you're going to be using the brush tool anyways. And here we have the clone stamp tool, which is essentially a tool which you activate using the Option Alt key. And then as you can see, it literally like samples, as you can see from the X, the part of the image in that direction. So I can simply resample it and go like this, but as you can see, this is not making much sense in this scenario. But if I want, for example, to remove these details right here, I can easily use it and leverage it in order to do so. So definitely another really interesting and cool tool. And for this tutorial, I won't go into much more details about some of these other tools right here, simply because it's going to be part of other videos. But I want to leave you with also the basic type tools. So if I write over here type, and I increase this to 72, well, as you can see, it's really small. But if we use Command plus T, you can see how we can easily increase the size, and we can also change the color and all sorts of different other things that we're going to see in the upcoming videos. So this is it when it comes to the basic introduction. We're going to explore Photoshop in more details in future videos, and I'll see you in the next one.